All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar with Randy Oliver. My name is Pat Bono, president of New York Bee Wellness, which is an independent educational grassroots charitable 501c3 non-membership organization. Its mission is to educate small-scale sideliner and beginning beekeepers. We do have a YouTube site with past in-person and online presentations. New York Bee Wellness also sends out newsletters several times a year, and we conduct statewide surveys twice a year for non-migratory beekeepers in New York State. All right, thank you, and welcome back, Randy. Glad you
Thank you,
got
Pat.
through.
Okie doke. Well, my main areas of focus are doing applied research that can be used by beekeepers immediately. So I've been focusing for the last several years. We'll go over this breeding for mite resistance in bees. And then until then, well, we still need to control them to test different kinds of sustainable rural management treatments and methods. And then also out here in California, where we've had a lot of drought, improving pollen substitutes. I do a lot of other things too, but that's the main ones. So let me first move on to managing the mite. A pretty large parasite compared to the size of its host. You don't want your bees looking like this. If you see that, yes, you do have a mite problem. So first thing, I have a whole PowerPoint on Varroa management concepts, but I'm going to just pull out just a couple of them right here. So the reason you're doing Varroa management is as a vector management. It's not the mites that kill the colony, it's the viruses that the mites vector. You can see here where I plotted out your mites per 100 bees in the red plot right here, and then your prevalence of deformed wing virus and paralytic viruses. And you see they track the mite infestation rate almost exactly. And as long as you keep your mite infestation rate down here low, just a couple of mites per 100 bees. So that'd be 6 mites in a half cup sample in a mite wash or a sugar shake. The colony remains pretty healthy. The viruses don't get out of hand. As you start to let that mite count climb up, the viruses just start to go epidemic in the hive. So if you use the integrated pest management pyramid, which is used for all crops and livestock, you start with cultural biological methods. So that would be resistant stock. So like I have a bunch of grapevines, table grapes at my place, and I planted, about a dozen or 15 cultivars 20 years ago. And I found out about a half of them just had nothing but mildew problems all the time. And the other ones just don't have any problems at all. I don't have to do any maintenance. I just prune them once a year. So I get rid of all the ones that take extra work and just use naturally resistant stock. And that's ideally what we would have done with the our honeybee stock when Varroa arrived. And a couple of countries did that. South Africa did that. And 6 years later, they don't even talk about Varroa at all. All their colonies have it, but it's not considered a major problem. Same with some of the South American and Cuba also. So what I did is, what I realized was a number of the commercial queen producers provide virtually all the queens for the whole country. And they had tried some little bit of resistance and found out, oh man, it's just too hard to do. And we're not going to do all kinds of instrumental insemination and single drone insemination and marker assisted selection and genetic testing and keeping track of bloodlines and doing brood dissection and all the other things. So I realized, man, it's dead in the water. As long as they sell all their queens, they have no financial incentive to engage in a serious selective breeding program for mite resistance. So I said, well, tell you what, I'm going to walk the walk, not just talk the talk, and see what would happen if I just select from my own operation, not bringing in any outside stock whatsoever, and just apply normal hard selective pressure, traditional breeding, the way people have bred plants and animals for thousands of years, long before the word genetics was ever invented, and see what kind of progress I can make and how much time would be involved and the costs. And I've been doing yearly reports on this. So what we do is every spring, we requeen all of our hives. This was already normal for us. After we come back from almonds, we set up portable tables and we just split all of our hives into about 4 nukes per hive. And everybody, it was an induced brood break. They all get a queen cell. We do a dribble for Varroa, and start out pretty clean every spring. And this is a huge management change that made Varroa management much easier for us. But so anyway, we start off with a whole bunch of uniform nukes every spring. of the nukes we make, we sell 1,000, we keep about 1,500 to 2,000 for ourselves. Spreading them out, we got 60 different apiaries in our county. So we can spread them out in groups of 30 to 40 in an apiary. They all have new queen mothers, and they're all grafted from the mothers of colonies that needed no mite treatments at all the previous year. And then we begin the Varroa race, and we let Varroa start to multiply, because you can't do selection for breeding unless you have a variability. So we need to let the mites build up enough that we can tell which colonies are not resistant and which ones are resistant. Typically, that starts to occur around June or July. We want to see some of the colonies getting mite counts up in the teens. Most of them maybe mite counts around 5 or 6 in a half cup of bees, and that's where our normal treatment threshold at that time of year. So at that point, we can separate out the 0s and 1 counts from the non-resistant ones. So we those that still have mite counts of 0 or 1, we put a tag on top and do not treat them, and we go ahead and we treat all the rest and just manage them normally in the same yards. So the breeders don't get moved at all. Now to do 1,500 mite washes, we have a very efficient system where we usually have one person running an agitator or 2 on the back of the truck, and the rest of us pulling the samples. And we can do this at the rate of 4 man-minutes or less per sample. That includes taking the sample, bee sample, shaking it out of the hive, putting it in the cup, getting it over to the truck, getting it agitated, getting the numbers recorded, and getting the numbers back on the hive closed up and back. That means if we have a team of 3, we can almost do them at the rate of 1 per minute. So that means a yard of 40 colonies, 40 minutes later, we're packing up and leaving. We've got mite wash counts on every single hive in the yard. And that opening our eyes to what's happening has just been so illuminating for us. It unblinds us to what's happening with Varroa in our operation. And you identify which ones are super high mite factories, and you deal with them right away. You eliminate that queen and requeen it, hit them really hard with formic acid, get those mite counts down. So they're not a mite factory diffusing mites to the rest of your hives. And then we just run the breeder. So see the white tags here, that would be a potential breeder, not yet breeder, just potential breeder. And we continue then to come back every month and monitor the potential breeders again, wash them again, see if their mite counts have gone up. We do all our mite washes now with Dawn detergent, viewing the mites with a 10x magnifying mirror about 4 inches below the cup. Very, very quick. Record all this data. Now, typically in our operation, we start nukes about this time of year, mid-March to April. And typical mite counts would grow like this. Typically by mid-August to September, they'd be up around a count of 50, and those colonies would be walking dead. They would soon collapse. That would be untreated colonies in our California operation started this way. This would be very normal. Our resistant colonies, we start off, and they maintain mite counts of 0 or 1. Otherwise, they're out of the program till July, and then second wash and third wash, fourth. November, we do allow them to bump up a little bit as they shut down brood rearing. The mites come out of the brood. I initially eliminated them, but then Dr. John Kiefis over in France, who invented the bond method of breeding, said, "No, Randy, don't do that. A lot of them will bring them down." And we found out, yes, they will. They can get up to a count of 10 in November, and by springtime, when we're grafting again, they're down to a count of 0 on their own. And this is what we're looking for. We're looking for colonies that have counts like this: the July count, the August count, the September count, the November count of just 0s. And we have colonies that are 0s every single time, right in the middle of all the rest of the hives. And people say, well, they're going to be pissy bees. They're going to be non-productive. Well, here I am doing a gentleness test. In an afternoon in August, I'll go out, I'll do 50 mite washes every afternoon, dressed like this. And I would know if they were not gentle. We've always had a reputation for gentle stock. We're not going to change that. So we have zero tolerance for any bees that are pissy at all. There's no correlation between mite resistance and defensiveness. They're also beautiful colonies. They're so healthy because they have no mite levels. When I have them analyze for viruses, their virus counts are extremely low. They're often the most productive colonies in the yard for honey. They go to almond pollination. They have to pass all the tests to remain as potential breeders. So here's what we're finding out. We were underestimating our success because what we were doing is in July, anybody in many yards, if you had a mite count of 1, we would knock you out of the program because we had so many zeros and treat them. So we had no idea whether they would have taken that 1 count down to a 0. So this spring, I needed to have about 450 or 500 colonies for various field trials. I run large scale field trials. And so I told my sons, hey, when you bring the bees back from almonds and you're making nukes, when you find the queen in these colonies you're splitting, put her in a nuke and do not treat it and let that nuke grow up. All of those would have been not marked as breeders. They would have been assumed non-resistant colonies, okay, because they did not have potential breeder tags on them. And what we found was, come July and August, we couldn't find enough non-resistant colonies. I need to run a test for miticide treatments. I need to have colonies that actually allow the mice to build up. If they stay at 0, I can't test the efficacy of a miticide. And the joke was, every year we're going, damn, not enough mites. We can't find enough colonies with mites. We were just laughing at ourselves. So I plotted out the distribution, the histogram here. So what this is, dolls, we have a yard called dolls, a yard called Noma. So this would be the percent of hives in that yard. So there are 93 hives in that yard. So this stack adds up to 100%. So that'd be all 93 hives. These would be the mite wash counts in August. And you see, you still had almost 30% with counts below 0 to 5. We had a few that this shows the potential of how high the mice can get. We counts in that 50, 60 range. These are perfect for my trials for miticides, but these are ones that we want to eliminate from our breeding program. Same with the 135 hives. This is a big holding yard here. We had almost 35% of them in that very low range. But it's not black or white. These colonies here, we're still talking August here. They still have relatively low counts. And one thing I noticed with these guys, on the semi-resistant ones, when they start hitting counts of 10 or 15, they go, oh man, we got mites. And they suddenly upregulate their uncapping behavior and their Varroa-sensitive hygiene, and they'll bring those counts back down all on their own with no treatment. But first they have to be stimulated by having, enough mites to get them going. Okay. Okay, let's go on to the next one here. So here's our progress. We start in 2017 with our first queen 0, one queen out of 1,500 that exhibited resistance, okay? Slow progress. So the green would be our percent of our operation that shows resistance. Slow progress, tough. One of the reasons is they made out to our drone pool, that is, of all the surviving colonies, where we have very high survival, not only the resistant, but the non-resistant ones in our operation. We don't only stock drones from the resistant ones. That would be, we're going to start doing that this year. The genetics of the drone pool reflect the genetics not of their mothers, but of their grandparents. Okay, so you have a 2-year lag built in on genetic progress, trying to fix this trait in here. So up by 2022, we're up around that 30-some% level. This year, our October washes are saying in most of our yards, we're seeing 50% of our colonies have not needed a treatment yet. They have a mite count of 2% or less. One second. Now, in a few of our yards, we're up to 70% of the hives. So our yards typically are stocked with daughters from one queen. And the boys, up till now, have not been keeping as close a track as I've been asking them to. And they are realizing, yes, they're going to, next year, they are going to keep much closer track. So with these yards where we have a high percentage of daughters exhibiting resistance, we can really focus on them. One last thing before I take the question. So this is 500-fold increase in the amount of resistance. And so we don't claim we have resistant stock yet. We'll do that when we get up to 95%. But a 500-fold increase in 7 years. And it looks like it's increasing at a faster rate each year. This is pretty exciting for us. We just had a large commercial queen producer, close friend, approach us. They had gone out this spring. They needed bulk bees shaken into cages to stock their nukes, and asked if they could, if we had any strong yards down the almonds before we bring them home that they could shake bees out of. And we said, sure. So they went over, shook bees out of them. We get paid for those bees. What we didn't realize is when that crew went back and told the boss, wow, Randy's hives look really good in the almonds, caught the attention of him. And he goes, wow, so not only are you seeing resistance, but you're seeing good colonies. So we now are going to have access next spring to a 20,000 acre ranch that we control the bees in there. So we can set an isolated mating yard up in the middle and stock the entire ranch just with potential breeders or colonies that exhibit mite resistance, eliminate all the ones that we haven't have in there, and then breed off our best. And then he's going to actually produce queens at a larger scale off this stock. So this will be a big step up for us to be able to take a step up in our selective breeding pressure. Well, here's the interesting thing. So far, we're trying to find the low mite colonies to breed from. Once we pass 50%, now you're trying to find the high mite colonies to eliminate. And when we get up to like only 10% high mites, then you're just looking at those just to eliminate, and the rest are the norm. So this could be a tip point. Okay, question. Oh, unmute yourself, Pat.
Okay, 2 questions. One from Stan. How will mite-resistant bees be maintained with other beekeepers in the area and all those neighbors' drones?
They won't. And what happened? Okay, so what it means is until everybody in the neighborhood is running resistant stock, they're going to be outbred by the drones, depending on the ratio from non-resistant stock. That's why I'm looking at the commercial queen producers. If we can get the commercial queen producers to start incorporating resistance in their programs, then all those hundreds of thousands of queens going out, when they're all resistant, now it could work. They could be maintained, but it's going to take, no small beekeeper is going to do this on their own. It's going to take the large queen producers to do it.
Okay, because the second question has to do with how do you control the drones to maintain resistance?
By controlling the queens. Okay, which means that's why this large producer is having us bring in all of our own drone mother colonies, and in the mating nukes, stock them only with bees from our own resistant colonies, and have a 20,000 acre ranch that we isolate so we can actually do that. So no one's going to be able to just buy this stock and in 1 year breed resistant stock. They're going to have to engage in a program similar to ours, where they go out mite washing everybody every year to maintain that. But at least this is a start to get the whole industry moving in the right direction.
Oh, one more. Randy, it looks like the percentage of resistant colonies has roughly doubled from 2021 to 2022, and similar 2022 to 2023. Why do you think the resistant percentage has increased so much when compared to 2017 to 21 timeframe?
Because of the proportion of, okay, so if we're running 1,500 hives, and we only have a small number of resistant stock, the majority of our drone pool is non-resistant. As we get a higher and higher proportion of our drone pool coming from mothers who were resistant, then that means that we get a better feedback loop of mating. That's what I'm saying. We may be hitting a tip point here. When I work this out mathematically with Punnett squares, and I've done hundreds of hours of doing that, it all shows that we should hit a tip point and very rapidly change. And this might be next year, next spring may be that tip point where we will be able to make a big jump up. So cross your fingers.
Thank you.
Next. Okay. So we still need to treat our non-resistant stock. And we haven't used a synthetic miticide in 22 years. Okay. With no fluvalinate, no cumulphos, no amitraz. We've used nothing but oxalic, thymol, and formic acids. So we want to be sustainable on these. So we still do need to treat. So I still focus on those. Most countries just jumped all these steps and went straight to the synthetic chemicals. But they're non-sustainable and they cause comb contamination because they're all lipid soluble. They all dissolve into the beeswax, where the natural treatments tend not to dissolve in the beeswax. And so here's a timeline where we got tracheal mite here, Varroa mite here, and we started with some amitraz or tracheal mite. Did not work well for that. Then with fluvalinate. In about 6 years, fluvalinate stopped working. Then we got cumulphos. 3 years, that stopped working. And that's right here is where I said, no, I'm getting off that bandwagon. We never got on the amitraz bandwagon. So I expected them to develop resistance to amitraz just as quickly, but it's taken longer. So across the world right now, I just got back from Mondia, talked to beekeepers from all around the world. Across the world, amitraz is failing big time right now. So don't count on amitraz working too much longer. There's a and the thing with the synthetic miticides is that they work great until they don't, and then you're stuck. So this is some data from Frank Rinkovic looking at the resistance in the Varroa mites, and these USDA untreated colonies may be similar to ours. They're the totally non-resistant mites. There's mites out there now that are 20 times as resistant to amitraz as the way they started. There's apparently a very large fitness cost there. It means they give up the ability to reproduce as well in order to gain resistance to the miticide, and that keeps them so they're non-competitive with the non-resistant mites. So this happened with fluvalinate also, and after a few years of not using fluvalinate, the non-resistant mites quickly outcompete the resistant ones. If there were not this fitness cost, I can guarantee you these guys would outcompete the non-resistant mites in a couple of years. So it tells you that there is a cost to it. So the biopesticides are likely much more sustainable. And these, like I said, these are all that we've used. We do use HopGuard from time to time. So you can use, we're still on concepts, strategy. You can use my Varroa model for planning your strategy. And this would be just a default colony. You can modify this easily for any area of the world that you live in. Oh, and I'm sorry, I got the dates wrong. I showed this in Ipamondia for Spanish, and it's so these are southern hemisphere dates. I got to go back to pull the other slide in. So so the default would be the mites building up like this. A reactive management, which is what many beekeepers do, they wait until mite populations get high and then they treat them. And you get these up here, you start dropping off colony performance at about a mite count of 10. Okay, I noticed this very easily because we do so many thousands of mite washes. I can tell if a colony's got a few mites because they're just lagging. When you start getting up to this 20 to 30, they really start to slow down. So they're not non-performing colonies. Well, you may get the mite count down, but the virus epidemic has already taken a hold, and it's going to take you a month or more to purge that out. And that may be too late. So the proactive beekeeper, they start their mite control early in the spring, like March or April, and then maintain low mite counts for the entire course of the year. This is maybe the most important concept to get through your head is Varroa management. Good Varroa management doesn't start in summer. It starts way, way, way earlier in the season. So this is what we do is we come back from the almonds with big colonies. We split them. We may use formic acid before almonds if we see mites in them. Split them and do an oxalic acid dribble with an induced brood break. And then that mite count starts getting up here, pushing 5 or so at the end of June. So while the honey's still on, we'll give them formic acid or extended release oxalic acid. And then once the honey's off, we'll give them a thymol treatment. And then oxalic acid dribble, or you could do a vaporization. We like to dribble. I'll show you why later. Since we go broodless. And this is what we've done for over 20 years, year after year. And we don't have colony losses to speak of. This springtime splitting, making the nukes, allows you to start off clean every spring. This really is a big thing. Now be sure to rotate your treatments. The beekeepers always say, oh, what works? What, can I just put it on all year long, Randy? Well, the moment you put it on all year long, you're no longer a bee breeder, you're a mite breeder. And you're breeding for one thing, for resistance to that treatment. And many beekeepers are very successful at being mite breeders and breeding for resistant mites. So please don't be a mite breeder. Rotate your treatments. If you hit them from different direction, different modes of action throughout the year, it's very difficult for them to evolve resistance. Now, the question will come up, well, I thought that the natural treatments were harder for the mice to evolve resistance to. And yes, it appears they would be harder because they have a different modes of actions than the synthetics. But I would never bet against evolution. Evolution has a way of evolving resistance to anything. So rotate your treatments. Okay, I do have this on my first year of beekeeping, suggested natural treatments that are appropriate for each time of the season. You can go ahead relative to what the colony is doing. So you can look it up in my first year of beekeeping. Now, here's our big problem. We have too few treatment options in this country. And they all have very restrictive labeling, which makes it really, really tough. And then once somebody gets a product on the market and spends all that money, there's lack of innovation. They don't want to change anything. So even though we find out that the treatment, their label directions don't really work, like with Apiguard gel or with the Epibioxol, for the vaporization dose, that the labels aren't right. It's too hard for them to change it. It also makes them pricey to buy. And because we are such a small market, there's little financial incentive for large companies to develop new Varroa control products. So this is really a big problem in this country. And we'll talk a little bit later. I'm kind of not in battle, but I'm in communication with EPA about improving this situation. And so I asked to see if they could give us an own use exemption, similar to what New Zealand did. And the answer was no. But New Zealand realized beekeepers are going to use us anyway. And so they said it's okay to use common generic substances like oxalic acid or Formic or thymol in their own hives. Here's the thing to realize. Anytime you use any chemical with the intent of controlling a pest, and a pest could be a bacteria, a fungus, an insect, a rat, any of those. If your intent is to control the pest, that is insecticidal use. And you need to use a registered treatment properly if that's your intent. That means if you want to kill germs on your hand, you need to use a registered biocide. So you could use dial antibacterial soap, which is registered and makes the claim that kills 9% of germs. But if you were to wash your hands with plain old soap and your intent was to kill germs, you'd be breaking the law. Probably wouldn't go to jail. I know, you might get a knock on the door, but that would be breaking the law. If you take your clothing, because you have bed bugs, and throw it in the washing machine with the intent of killing the bed bugs, and you put detergent in there, you are breaking the law because that detergent is not registered for the use of killing bed bugs. So we live in this really weird situation. That's what my conversation with EPA is right now. We'll get back to that. So the volatile essential oils, the thymol, well proven. We're testing, heavy testing this year, and we'll continue next year with 5 other promising essential oils. They show some promise this year. We have to figure out the dose that the colonies can tolerate and continue to rear brood and look healthy, and then figure out how high you have to go to kill the mites also. So no big breakthroughs this year, but we'll continue this next year. We were just out going through a bunch of hives in a trial just yesterday, actually. So thymol, few different treatments available. This one's not available in the United States, but this is up in Canada. I just got back from speaking in Canada yesterday. So different thymol treatments, but they all require multiple treatments, and they all tend to suppress brood rearing, and if you put them on in hot weather, you can even drive the bees right out of the hive. Bees may also propolize over some of the treatments, or they'll build a cup around the fumes. And this is really neat. Some of the treatments we've been doing with the essential oils too, the bees will build a cup, completely encase it, and leave a gap. They don't touch the actual pad anywhere. They just make a cup around it to hold the fumes inside. It's really neat to look at. So I wondered if we could use a new delivery method for Timol with a slower release rate. And I published the results in American Bee Journal. They're on my website now. Last year, where we applied 12 grams, which 12 grams would be your normal dose for any of the products. 12 grams is the max you apply at any time. The bees responded just fine to that. So we tried 24 grams and responded fine too. So we went to 36 grams and they still did okay. We went up to 48 grams in hives in hot weather, and the colonies tolerated it just fine. And as far as percent mite reduction, looks like the sweet spot would be just about 40 grams of Timol applied that way. So this year, we ran this field trial of putting a rim on top of double deep hives in 95-degree weather with dark lids. The top surface of our plywood lids would reach 160 to 170 degrees during the day. Bottom surface about 120 degrees. So plenty of heat on this Timol. Each one of these blocks holds 10 grams of Timol. 10 grams, just a little bit less than what would be in a dose of Apiguard. So total 40 grams altogether. And some of the colonies, especially the weaker ones, they tended to move the brood nest down to the lower box. And then they would backfill with honey above. So this actually is something that can be used for arranging your colonies late in the summer. Get that brood nest down below where you want it, so they can store honey for the winter above it. Some colonies completely ignored the fumes, and they built comb and rear brood right next to these, because this works so well at slowing the release rate down. It takes about 3 or more weeks for that Timol to evaporate from out of the center of these blocks. What was interesting, some of the colonies, especially the weaker ones, in the upper brood chamber, the queen would come up and lay eggs in every cell. I don't know if you can see, but every cell has an egg here. But you don't see any young larvae. And it looks this way day after day, week after week. Eggs in every cell. The queen didn't mind the Timol smell at all, but the nurse bees refused to feed larvae in the upper box, but they would feed all the larvae in the lower box. So there was plenty of brood rearing going on in all colonies during the entire treatment time in the lower box, and some of them in the upper box. And after 21 days, beautiful patterns of brood, just taken right here from right next to the pads right here. And the colonies looking great. And I can't remember what the next slide is. Here we go. You may be curious about what happened to the mites. Well, the bad news was the mites didn't like it at all. Here's our starting mite counts in blue. Here's our ending mite counts 21 days later. If you don't see any red, that means the ending mite count was 0. So we had, notice we started with some high mite haul. This one started with a mite wash count of 80 mites in a half cup of bees. These are up in the 40 range, and all of these are in the 20 mite range. So much higher than treatment threshold. And look at all the zeros. It just hammered the mites. And these colonies looked great. I tracked them afterwards for the rest of summer. They built up just fine. So very exciting. I don't know if anybody's going to market this. I'm thinking about doing a workaround on this one here. So there are other essential oils. I've studied these deeply, looking at what's called the selectivity ratio. That means how many times more toxic are they to the mite than they are to the bee. And the very best ones are maybe 5 times. So you have a relatively small margin of safety. So we are testing these and we'll continue. Now your organic acids, you can look through those here. HopGuard 3, it works very well when there's no brood in the colony. It will work during the summer, but it takes 2 to 3 treatments to get the mites down. One of the things I like about this, it does not suppress brood rearing as Timol or as Formic or Timol might. So you can use this when the honey supers are on without suppressing brood rearing to any extent. They may move the brood to the side of the strip temporarily, but they will keep rearing brood. And it does take 2 to 3 applications if they're rearing brood. Okay, now let's move on to the other acids, oxalic and formic. Both of those are acids. Okay, they're both a little bit stronger than lemon juice and can burn your eyes. If you get them, you don't feel them on your skin, but if you get it on your skin with formic, you may not feel it. The next day, all your skin peels off your hand. And oxalic, you don't feel it on your skin either. So we often taste our fingers. Actually, we always taste our fingers to make sure we don't have it on our fingertips. And then we always have baking soda. 10 heaping tablespoons per gallon is the optimum formulation I've found. This will instantaneously neutralize any spilled formic or oxalic on your smoker, on your hive tool, on your hands if you have gloves. So we always keep this on hand. So formic acid, natural from ants. It's the thing that makes stinging nettles sting. Lots to be said for it. It's the only treatment that can penetrate the cappings at high doses, but it does take a high dose to penetrate the cappings and really get highly efficacious mite kill. And I'm testing a number of different vaporizers not available on the US market. I've just brought a fresh one home, Swedish one back from Canada yesterday. So, but at a high dose, if you're not worried about knocking out the queen, you can actually kill the mites under the cappings. And formic gives colonies usually a nice fresh start. Lots of different application methods. I'm currently testing these and a couple of other adjustable dispensers. And this is the precursor to the MiteAway 2 and Formic Pro pads. These, I'm sorry, to the MiteAway Quick Strips. These were called MiteAway 2 pads. And these were wonderful. And there are beekeepers that I know of who still recycle these every year and recharge them with formic on their own and use them over and over again very efficaciously, and prefer them actually to the two current products sold by not apiary products. So I did experimentation this year, wondering, could I pull the queen out of a hive for a couple of days when I put the treatment on, wait for that formic flash to drop down, wait till the bees were all nonchalant with the formic acid, all accustomed to it. Could I then reintroduce the queen and let her walk into the hive and not get killed? And what I found was a number of hives, one, the queen may not want to walk into the hive because of the smell of the formic, and other ones get immediately balled by their queens, by their colony, by their workers, I should say. Other ones, they get mobbed by their workers, but no balling. So it's not aggressive mobbing. They're just happy to see mom back again. But there were a percentage that the workers killed the queens. So that's something I've been wondering about for many years. Whether that might kill the queens is due to the formic or to the workers. The queen is the largest and healthiest and best fed colony, bee in the whole colony. Why would she be more susceptible to formic fumes than the workers? You don't see workers dying normally from formic. So I followed this up with another experiment and went out to a bunch of hives, found the queen, marked her, and put her inside a push-in cage. And I invented this one, a wide mouth mason lid with a piece of 1/8 inch harbor cloth soldered on the inside makes a beautiful push-in cage on combs over plastic foundation. You just shove it in, it hits that plastic foundation, leaves just enough space for the bees queen to walk around. So if you want to make a quick push-in cage, this works great. Anyway, we put the queen in. I had tried this last year, but I didn't give the queen any feed. So if they died, and some of them did die, I didn't know whether it was due to formic toxicity or to the workers not feeding them because I hadn't provided them with the feed. So this year, I pushed them in over combs with honey in them so the queen could feed herself if necessary, and put in 3 attendants along with the queen. Not enough to ball her, but to compare her survivorship with the queen, and found out, yeah, many of these queens, with this placed right below the formic pad, inches below it, in hot weather, survive just fine. And this is my son's find this. We run our queens for 1.5 years, our good queens. And then come August, September, as they're getting ready to be superseded because they're running low on sperm, we will take them, put them in a single, and hit them really hard with formic acid to clean them up, and then we'll add that box of bees with a dead queen to a single with a new queen. That works really well. We intentionally want to kill that queen because she was a non-resistant queen. What we find is it's really hard when you want to kill a queen in hot weather with formic acid. It doesn't always work. And they're all old second-year queens, and a large proportion of them just laugh at the formic acid and survive just fine. So this is what happened in this trial too. Many of those queens survive right here, caged. They can't get away right under the formic fumes, but a few of them did die while their workers survived. So this does affirm that queens apparently are more susceptible to formic acid than the workers are. So one thing we did do, and I published this one also, with the Formic Pro strips, they have a big flash off the first day. If you just save the wrapper when you unwrap them and just push it over the top of the pad, not on the bottom, and then put your second box on, that reduces that flash off the first day. It extends the release a little bit longer, and you don't get any queen kill in hot weather. So this is a trick for you if you're trying to do formic in hot weather by covering this pad. Hot weather, you will not get very good efficacy with formic acid any way you apply it. I'll tell you that right now. I think the bees just fan too much or something, but it's better to do it in the recommended treatment range. But we don't have that option in summer in California when it gets hot. So we have to do it in hot weather. Then oxalic acid. So here's my grandson sucking on some buttercup oxalis right here. All Californians grow up sucking on buttercup oxalis. Tastes like lemonade. And this is the plant that oxalic acid is named after. Oxalis is the genus. And the dribble method with 5 milliliters is well tested. I'm, not only me, but other researchers are questioning whether we should be diluting it into more milliliters to get better spread in the hive. And so I'm going to be doing more. I've already done some experiments. I'm doing some more, try to come up with the optimum amount of milliliters to apply to the hive, not increasing the dose, but to increase the milliliters so it's distributed better on the bees. And I'll show you how I can find out. Anyway, this works really well for an early winter cleanup. As soon as they go broodless, we hit all of our hives, both boxes, and squirt it in there. And that's a hugely improved our mite management. You start clean going into the winter then. Now, during the summer, if you do multiple dribbles, so I did 4 dribbles at 4-day intervals here. And so starting counts my counts were in the blue, ending counts in the red. So 4 dribbles, either in 5 milliliters, in 20 milliliters, with either glycerin and Thymo, or just plain water, and then the control group here. And you notice almost no mite control. There's just as much red as there was blue. So you're wasting your time with multiple dribbles during the summer when there's brood there. But I also measured colony strength at beginning and end. And you notice the red end of trial, very few of these colonies that were dribbled grew, but the control group all grew. So there apparently was an adverse effect from multiple dribbles. We don't tend to see that with oxalic acid vaporization. So that would be the advantage on vaporization during the summer. Although it does take multiple vaporizations, typically with the 1 gram per brood chamber dose, takes about 7 to 10 vaporizations to bring the mite count way down. Yeah, question.
Going back to the Formic, Chris said I spoke with a Chilean beekeeper that believed Formic fumes made it harder for the worker or nurse bees to detect queen pheromones and cause them to make emergency cells.
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen. I have not seen that making emergency cells. So that's and I've looked in a lot of hives after Formic. So I think I probably would have noticed that one. So that sounds like one of those things that somebody comes up with an idea and then repeats it without ever just checking in a hive. You can create an induced brood break. Well, either these are widely used in Europe now to make a brood break during the summer, and then you can use a dribble to clean them up. if you even just confine the queen for 2 weeks, you don't have to extend it. I'll show you. You could also use queen excluder divider frames. And we use a lot of these in our queen ring and confine the queen between 2 frames. And if you go on my website, it tells it's day 1, day 14, so on every Saturday. Cage her on Saturday, 2 Saturdays later, release her, and then the 3rd Saturday, you remove that comb before any mites emerge from it and dribble the colony on that point. So it's only 2 weeks of caging. It's excessive to go more than that. Unless there's a lot of drone brood, then you'd have to go a few days longer. Oxalic acid vaporization, it can be efficacious, very efficacious if there's no brood, but not so much when there's brood. And it does take the allowed dose, measured dose is 1 gram per brood chamber. Cameron Jack has shown that's an inadequate dose when there's brood in there. So, and even when they're broodless, that 3 grams per brood chamber is better, but I can't make recommendations, and that's not approved. But there is no labor restriction on reapplication. So you could go out to your hive, shoot 1 gram in per brood chamber 3 times, and that would be totally legal. Then the Argentinians came up with an idea for dissolving oxalic acid in water and make it an extended release. So they came up with these strips right here, 3 to 4 hung over the top bars. To me, it's very labor intensive to do this with our double deep hives. So we shifted over to using a horizontal matrix and found out it only takes half the surface area. If we add up the surface area of these strips for an efficacious dose, you only need half the surface area with a pad like this, just the opposite of what you might think. They actually have better, more exposure laid this way than they do when they're hung. But the strips are very handy in single brood chambers or in nukes. And there's apparently no adverse effect upon the brood with treatment and good honey crops. So I'm continuing to test different matrices and formulations, ratios of oxalic to glycerin or oxalic glycerin and water. So this is our trial from 2023. Here's Brooke and Rose, my 2 of my assistants out here. And we used 216 hives in this trial. We had to find non-mite resistant hives to do that. That was really hard coming up with the 216. 18 different formulations we tested. So Brooke had a monitor. She was the hawk, the supervisor. She watched every movement to make sure we took the right pad out of the right tub and put it into the properly labeled hive and then recorded it. And very confusing. We actually, on the first 2 yards, had to go back, pull all the treatments out for 2 of the treatments and redo them all because we came up 1 strip off. So I will not allow any errors in these trials at all. So you just go back, you start all over again. And I just made this graph up today. So this is 65 days. We did them, same thing. Starting counts are blue, ending counts are red. We tried New Zealand strips, Swedish sponges, double corrugated cardboard. So not single layer corrugated cardboard, but 2 layers of corrugation, which are for heavier packing boxes. I found that those absorb it very well. King Zach cloth, that's a cloth, a towel, kitchen towel made in Israel that is very strong and absorbent, and it looked very promising. And then chipboard, that's flat board, similar to what you make the strips out of, the hung strips, just laid flat on top. All these 4, all the same size, 2 of the same size pads. And these are 3 strips per box here. The ones that have an R after them were repeated. So we repeated the application at 30 days to see if there was a difference. And we did not see any appreciable difference by repeating at 30 days. You just put them in once and leave them in there. I'm working with a New Zealand manufacturer who makes recommendations for New Zealand beekeepers, and the recommendations were to repeat them and to use a specific formulation. So I'm testing, but all those recommendations were based upon anecdotes rather than hard data. So that's why I collected hard data this year. Then for each of those different matrices, we tried 3 different ratios of oxalic acid to glycerin: the 1-to-1 by weight, the 1 to 2, so twice as much glycerin as oxalic acid by weight, and the 1 to 1 to 1, which by follow the research of a researcher called Canellis, who did 5 years of study over in Arabia, and said that this worked best. I was skeptical on this, but it would have been cheaper if it had worked. What you want to look for is the least amount of red. So the 1 to 1 to 1 did not perform that well. Fairly well on the sponges, but not so well on the other ones. The 1 to 2 ratio, the higher glycerin ratio, this is like the Argentine formula. Again, an awful lot of red and some outliers where the mite counts went up quite a bit. Look over here to the 1 to 1 ratio, which we've been using for some years, and much less red. The chipboard did not work well with it, but the other ones, the corrugated cardboard, the King Jack cloth, the New Zealand strips, and the sponge, the positive control, all got pretty good mite control. It's more red, more outliers than we normally see in these trials. So I don't know what it was this last summer or this summer that we had so many outliers went up, because usually we don't see this much red with this positive control. So I'm not sure why that was. What I'm not showing you here, we also tested citric acid on sponges, and the results were pretty poor. So I'm not giving up citric acid, but the results were not that promising. Now, here's the thing. We're doing all these treatments. We've used citric oxalic acid for 3 decades. We've been completely blind on what it does inside the colony. So if this is extended release, you question how long do you acidify your hives? Does it keep building up? And how big a dose actually shows up in the bees? Now, I went over some of this data, well, that's last year's, but I'm going to breeze through this pretty quickly. So we do titration, where we get a colored titrant in a test tube. And I've dialed this method in really good now. We can do these in just 15 seconds. I can tell you exactly how many micrograms are on the bee. So you drop it in. The more acid, the more it turns towards orange. Then you drip in a drop at a time until it comes back to the same color. And then bingo, you have your titration. So here's 2 reference tubes. Then I put in a precisely measured amount of 100 micrograms of oxalic acid in here. And that would be the optimal theoretical dose per bee by the EPA approved treatments, would be 100 micrograms. In reality, very few bees ever get 100 micrograms, show 100 micrograms on their bodies. So then I made up an indicator that theoretically at 10 drops should come back to this color. So here's 9 drops, a little bit too green, 10 drops, bingo. Right? Exactly matches the reference color. And here's the neat thing. 11 drops, one more, it turns more blue. So you can see if you overshot. So this allows you to very accurately and quickly determine how many micrograms are on a bee. I found that oxalic acid degrades very rapidly as soon as it touches an organic substance. If you drop it on a glass or plastic cover slip, it doesn't degrade over time at all. So here's your first hour by hour for the first 12 hours. Then here's 1 day, then 2 days up to 12 days. So no degradation if it doesn't touch organic. But if it touches a bee, if you mix it with glycerin, if you mix it with sugar, it degrades very, very rapidly. If you vaporize it, so the red is vaporization, you've lost almost half of it by 12 hours. It's off the bees. And then by 24 hours, you're down well to half. By 6 days, you're down to almost nothing. So it does not last on the bees. The other thing is, so untreated bees, there's no color change at all. So here's 1 hour after an oxalic acid dribble. And remember, theoretically, you should get 100 micrograms per bee. That's what the dose works out, but it's very unevenly distributed on the bees. So these guys here would be about 100, maybe a little more than 100 micrograms. Some of these here would be closer to 0 micrograms. So that is, this allows me to see with different treatment application methods, how well I can get them distributed across the bees. So I'm still doing lots of these. So last year we did this, I haven't published this yet, so I'm going to show you again. And we tried 15 different application methods with vapor, dribble, sponges, New Zealand strips, shop towels. Went out every day, taking samples of bees from the same comb in the middle of the upper brood chamber, 5 bee samples, to take averages, titrate them out, and the end result was when you first apply these, you get a big spike of oxalic acid. So the vapor, so right here, this is at 3 grams per brood chamber. This is 3 times the allowable dose. It gets up to this high. The dribble is way up here. So this is why we like that dribble. You get a much higher dose on the bees with the dribble than you do with the vapor, even at the 3 times the allowable dose of the vapor. Okay. But all 3 of those, the vapor and dribble, both dropped down quickly. We reapplied them here, and then we reapplied the New Zealand strips right here. And you can see that everybody by 3 days drops down pretty low, and then they stay in this 3 to 7 microgram per bee range, clear out to 60 days. Now, some of this may be from bee drift from hive to hive, because they all worked out pretty close to the same. We now are unblinded, so I'm still doing tons of these and learning more and more what's happening in the hive. So if you're vaporizing, so I did summer and winter vaporizations of double deeps with 8 frame clusters, roughly. That's 8 frame clusters, 9 frame cluster. These are this is done 2 grams per double deep. So that's 1 gram of oxalic per brood chamber. Some of these dots, these are for 10 bees, so there should be 10 dots, but I got to offset them so you can see them all. So some overlap, but the average is a dotted line. This is half hour after application, 2.5, 8.5, 1 day, and then 2 days, and then 3 days after application. We want to be up in this range up here for efficacy. And you can see with that 1 gram per brood chamber, you never get up there. And that's wintertime. Summertime, you're even lower. The bees get it off even faster. Here's 6 grams per double leaf, 3 grams per brood chamber, 3 times the allowable dose on a 9 frame cluster. Here's summertime treatment, lower, but wintertime application, you get, here's a bee with 130 up here. So you get these for your first 12 hours. You got some bees up here with much higher doses, and this is probably how it's killing the mites. And even the average is up here in the 30 range, which is pretty good here. So this is telling us, Cameron Jack got evidence just by mite control. This is evidence based upon titration of the actual amount of acid on the bees' bodies, which explains the lack of mite control of this dose. So how does it work at such low residue levels? So I found this great paper by Milani. There's some really good researchers in Europe, and Milani and Nanetti out of Italy, just have lifetime bodies of incredible work. I really respect these guys. And I haven't ever met other, and I can look at them, try to reach them somewhere, even Monty or somewhere, but I'd like to congratulate them for their work. He used a powder spray tower to spray oxalic acid or oxalic acid and glycerin onto the bottom of glass dishes at exactly precise rates of micrograms per square centimeter, and then dropped live mites on there, let them walk for an hour, picked them off, put them onto live pupae, and then checked for mortality at 24, 48 hours. What he found was at 10 micrograms per square centimeter, virtually all the mites would die by 48 hours. At 1 microgram, 1/10 of that per square centimeter, you'd have almost half dying after 48 hours. I found a figure for the surface area of a honeybee so I could use my titration. And that means that when I'm titrating at 32 micrograms, which we saw back there on the greenish test tubes, that you would expect a mite that walked on that bee, if it walked all over the surface, got exposed, to die within 48 hours. But even the ones at that really, really low 3 to 4 microgram dose, you still have a pretty good chance of them dying within 48 hours. So that's apparently how this works. Here's another question now. I got more questions from this research than answers so far. Citric acid titrates out very acidic. but it doesn't kill the mites very well. So why would oxalic work better than citric? We're assuming that it's the acidity. The literature says the oxalate ion has no adverse effect on the mites. But somehow oxalic acid works better than citric acid at the same degree of acidity. One of the things is this was shown by Illinatus. I spoke to him over in Chile at Ipamondia. He showed movies, and I don't have the movie, of the heart beating in a Varroa mite. So he has films of the heart beating, and then he's working with Vita. Vita is trying to register an extended release product. It's in progress to be released in the United States, strips. So that's good news. Anyway, if they touch a mite with oxalic acid, the heart starts slowing down, and within 11 minutes, it stops. So I'm very unsure, and nobody knows, how could contact with an acid arrest cardiac function inside the mite's body? That's an open question right now. Another interesting trial that came out, this group right here dipped toothpicks into various organic acids, then let a mite walk on it and rotated toothpick slowly, and to see which ones acids made the mites fall off. And apparently some of these acids reduce the grip of the mites, and they will fall down, and then they will die. And they didn't delve in deep whether it was absorbed through the empodia on the mite's feet and you got toxicity, or whether it just burned the empodia so they couldn't hold on. But just the mites falling may have something to do with this. So we really don't know the modes of action of these acids. And then one that I have been investigating is whether the acid applied to bee cuticle is a behavioral disruptor to the mite. So back with tracheal mite, by pure serendipitous accident, the USDA lab at Tucson found out that simply putting Crisco into a beehive created an odor that prevented the young questing mites from identifying a newly emerged host worker at the appropriate age to invade their trachea into the duospiracle. So you could treat with a totally non-toxic substance, the Crisco is totally non-toxic, but by disrupting their behavior, the mites were unable to reproduce and would disappear from the hive. I was curious whether the oxalic acid is doing this. So I have in my incubators, I'll do a control group and a test group, and I'll treat one group with some, and depending on the age, and I'll use different ages of bees, a bunch of tests, you'll see. But I can put on different concentrations of acids on these bees, let that acid work on them for a few hours or a few days. Then I go out to a high mite hive, sugar dust it to drop live mites, wash the mites off, bang them into a tray, dry them off, and then they start walking pretty quickly in a few minutes. And you very quickly, we pick them up and we sweep them off through a funnel into this chamber I've built, okay? Into the chamber, I put a group of live or dead bees. It doesn't make any difference for the odor in this end, the control group in one end, and the test group in the other. And you wind up looking like this, a bunch of pile of mites in the middle. And I'm going to see how these live mites respond to the odor of either group of bees. So I hook up a slight vacuum, aquarium vacuum tube to the middle. So I draw air in over the bees at either end. So you have two air plumes coming in here with different scents, and the mice get to choose which way they go. This takes a fair amount of work setting these trials up. They're really, really cool to watch. And some of them, the mice have strong response. So unheated oxalic acid, heated esterified oxalic acid, citric acid, old versus young bees. So if I do bees that fly off from a shake versus the ones that don't fly, so I have old versus young, virtually all the mites go to the young bees. Very few go to the older bees. So they can clearly tell those bees. But if you treat them all with oxalic acid, they still can tell, even with the oxalic acid in there. But if you just put oxalic acid on the bees, the mice show a very strong preference are repulsion from the bees that had any acid on their bodies. What's interesting, one of the ones I did is I allowed worker bees to walk across a 3-inch strip of oxalic acid and glycerin on cardboard and then collected them. So they had one walk across. So they would just barely get it on their feet, not on their bodies. And then I titrated them. And yeah, I could titrate acid easily on their feet. And I used bees from a high mite hive and then put them in the incubator to see whether that would cause the mites to drop off the bees. And I did a positive control, where I sprayed a light spray of oxalic acid on the bees' bodies. The sprayed bees, all the mites dropped off overnight completely. None of the mites dropped off of the ones with the oxalic acid on their feet, despite the fact that, let's see, they even have it. I don't know if I have it in here. The mites can tell by smell that they have it. You can titrate it, but it does not kill the mites. So another one, we have a lot of WTF moments in our research going, what in the world is happening? Okay, I want that one there. So back in July, I realized I asked the EPA the wrong question about the own use exemption, that it's not up to them. They have to follow FIFRA, the law. Congress has to pass a law for an own use exemption. So I went back, and I'm not an attorney, but I read a lot of legalese in FIFRA. It's a very long document. And I started searching different words, and I hit one word, that unregistered, and that popped up, and I read a paragraph. Section 136A in FIFRA. I don't know how familiar the rest of you are with section 136A of FIFRA, but it was worth a read because it has this word right here, may. So this is just 3 paragraphs from a much longer letter that I sent to the director of the Office of Biochemicals in EPA. 136A states, to the extent necessary to prevent unreasonable adverse effects on the environment, the administrator may, not shall, but may, by regulation, limit the distribution, sale, or use in any state of a pesticide that's not registered. It doesn't say that they shall regulate it. It says they may regulate the use of it. We beekeepers using that. Okay, so I said, as far as beekeepers are concerned, our interpretation, I widely spoke for you, is that FIFRA does not confer blanket authorization for the EPA to regulate or restrict the use of every off-the-shelf natural substance used for pesticidal purposes within beehives, but may limit the use only if the EPA has determined that that would cause unreasonable adverse effects on the environment. Such a decision to limit the use of a specific pesticide would need to be based upon the determination from a formal risk assessment by the Environmental Fate and Effects Division of the agency. And I asked them for a copy of that, that formal risk assessment, which I knew they would not have. That was in July. Didn't get any answer at all. So come September, Charlie Linder and I were talking. He's on the public outreach for AHPA and ABF. Got me together with Fran Boyd, our lobbyist, and we said, well, let's have the ABF and AHPA forward copies of my letter to EPA and see if we can get some an answer, as well as got a couple of senators' staffs to ask the question. Then when I was down in Aphimondia in September, I get a phone call saying, could you join a Zoom call with the administrator of the EPA? So my letter had gone all the way to the top of the EPA. Okay, you can't get any higher in EPA than the administrator. Very friendly Zoom call. And during that call, I mentioned, I never even got an acknowledgement that anybody even received the letter. Well, guess what was in my inbox the next day? a polite acknowledgement that they had received my letter. Because there was a team of EPA attorneys who have been working on this letter response for some time. I still have not got anything back on this. So they it's going to be interesting seeing how they respond and how they do. We may challenge them in court on this because they have to demonstrate that beekeeper own use within their hives of these natural biodegradable products could cause an adverse effect upon the environment. In my letter, I went over the 4 different things that you look for out of FIFRA, how the definition of things that would be adverse effects, and I shot holes in all of them. So I took a lot of time on this letter, and so pretty cool to have it go to the top of EPA and choke on the attorneys there. So we will see. So right now, if anybody tells you that it's against the law to use off-the-shelf oxalic acid, they're just talking out of their hat, because EPA has never answered that question for me. We have no idea. Nobody knows whether it's against the law or not. And that's it for now.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I do have several miscellaneous questions.
Great.
Okay. Can the aluate cap strips be placed on top bars instead of hung?
Yeah, they could, but you'd put them in at half the dose. Now, I spoke with a beekeeper up in Canada day before yesterday, and he is manufacturing the same strips that they use in New Zealand, and has a machine that actually dips them in the oxalic acid and mass produces them. It's not legal to do so in Canada, but he sells a ton of them up there. And what he's finding is if you apply them early in the season, and he puts them even in during the winter, at a very low dose and never let the mite count come up, a very small dose will maintain low mites throughout the year. And I said, well, be sure you work in a Thiamol or Formic treatment also to rotate treatments, but or even an amatraz treatment if you want to use amatraz. But that's a possibility. So to answer your question, yeah, you could do that, and but not at the full rate. When I've done it at equal surface area, you actually can see adverse effects on the brood because they get too big a dose.
Okay, for fall winter oxalic acid vaporization in the Northeast, how many treatments do you recommend?
I don't make recommendations. Okay. But I give you all the data you want. I already told you that the 1 gram per brood chamber has been shown not to be very efficacious. Okay, but I cannot possibly recommend an illegal treatment.
Okay, is the heat wave in the last few years in California helping to control Varroa naturally?
No, not at all. We would think it would, because Varroa is adapted for cooler temperatures. It really does not like higher temperatures. But we have brown boxes, unpainted wax dip boxes, so they're all brown. They all absorb heat, and no, Varroa breeds very happily during the heat out there.
Can you comment on using CO2 for mite checks?
Yeah, I've tried it, and then Dr. Ralph Buchner from Germany tried it, and another researcher tried it, and all 3 of us agreed it didn't work very well.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things, especially in the Vita mite wash cup, which they copied my design. They sent me prototypes, and then they ignored my recommendations, and they came out with a cup that is just terrible. We will soon be releasing an inexpensive cup. Charlie Linder he's got the injection molding. He just sent me prototypes. Needs a couple of tweaks, but we hope to maybe by the time the national conventions have those cups to sell at a very low price, which are much more user-friendly.
If you could advise Australia on how to deal with their newfound Varroa problem, what would you be telling them?
Why are you making that a hypothetical question? How in the world do you think I'm not advising them right now? In fact, my phone's been off the hook from the day of the first discovery. The beekeeper whose operation it was found in has been calling me on a regular basis. So I'm always up to date on what's happening there. And the Australian queen producers, I'm talking a lot to the Australians. What was funny is one of them, I was being interviewed on Zoom a few days ago, and she said, well, Randy, how fast do you think Varroa could spread across our country? And I said, well, what's the speed limit on your highway? She goes, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, they're very migratory. They are migratory beekeepers beyond anything we see in the United States and Australia. They're moving all the time. So, yeah, Varroa has a chance of spreading quite a bit. So what I tell them is they have a decision to make. And that is, do they want to follow the path of jumping straight to synthetic miticides? The government is already passing out synthetic strips. Right now, they have organic honey and organic beeswax with no miticide residues in it. I said, so you guys, it's up to you. Do you want to contaminate all your combs, or do you want to learn how to do it without synthetic miticides and maintain your organic, certification? So that's a question that they have to answer. They're very interested in my selective breeding program. They won't be able to import any stock because any imported stock needs to be shown to be a virus free, which is next to impossible. So, I'll be talking to the queen breeders again in this next week.
How did you get the thymol into those cellulose blocks?
I made a saturated solution with pure alcohol, and it absorbs right in. It's very easy to calculate the amount in there. And then let the alcohol evaporate off, and the thymol remains. People are under the misconception that thymol is volatile or evaporates quickly, and that's totally a misconception. Thymol is has a very low vapor pressure. And stop my share here. Yeah, very low vapor pressure, and evaporates very slowly. So the alcohol can evaporate off completely before the thymol evaporates appreciably.
What other mite treatments are close to coming on the market that you know of?
The two manufacturers are working on oxalic strips. There's some RNA products coming. There's apparently a new synthetic that somebody's working on. EPA is very hush-hush about this, so it's hard to find out. And there's a company that I've been advising out of Israel for a few years. They have a device now that is solar powered. It's a little plastic box. You slide in your hive entrance and leave it there, and you can adjust it so it will apply small doses of miticide once a day, twice a day, 5 times a day, once a week. And it's set up now to apply very small amounts of amitraz to a hive. Now, this is the way that in some countries they've vaporized amitraz by burning it on a filter paper strips for many years. That was used here in this country early on. Everybody stopped doing it. I don't know why that was never popular in the U.S. And I'm certainly not suggesting it because amitraz fumes are very dangerous to breathe to humans. But they have this little device you can do that, and so now they're bringing that to market. We don't know if that'll be registered in the U.S., but it's a set and forget device. So you could treat your hives once a month, and it would just program it, and it would do that. They're interested now in developing it to use other things besides the amitraz. So they asked me to be on their board on a paid position. I said, no, I'm not going to be on anybody's paid position. I will donate my time to advise you, but I don't want any conflict of interest with anything. So there's a lot of companies that if I feel they have a product of use to our industry, I'm always happy to advise them.
Any insight into whether oxalic mixed into Crisco has any results?
I haven't tried that. The problem is it's not soluble in Crisco. So that's a fat. Oxalic acid will dissolve in water. So, but that, you know what? That is a good question. Dang, I'm leaving in 2 days for a long speaking engagement, or I would start that trial tonight and give you an answer in a few days. I will make a note right now. Yo, make my notepad out right now. When I get back, I managed due to an error in somebody telling me the wrong date to be absolutely slammed with speaking engagements for the next 30 days. So when I get back, I'll do that. So OA in Crisco titrate. Okay, so what I can see, here's what I can do. I don't have to run a 2-month field trial. I can put it in and then titrate the bees. I'll tell you if there's acid residues on them. That's really easy for me to do. So I have a note to do that. I'll put it on my to-do list. So get back to me in a month or so, and I will answer your question on that.
Okay. Marianne says, when you're not doing research, what do you do for fun? Do you have any downtime?
Well, the research is fun. So no, there's almost nothing else I do. I mean, I have a big orchard and a big garden. I got 40 fruit trees and grapevines and berry vines, and that's pretty much it.
All right. And Jack says, thanks, Randy. Your answers make me laugh.
Good. All right. Yeah. Hey, life should be fun. And this bee research it's so interesting because those what the fuck moments, and that's something we get all the time. If an experiment turns out the way you expect it to, you haven't learned anything. You just justified your thoughts. When it turns out totally opposite of what you expect, that's when you can go, wow, how can we figure out why that is? So we have all the experiments we do, they just keep coming up with more and more questions. So the clock is ticking. I'm not going to live forever. So I'm excited just to answer as many questions as I can.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Safe travels. And
You
thanks
bet.
again.
Thank you, Pat. Happy beekeeping, everybody.